Hello and welcome to PerchPeek Pods, the only place to get in-depth, long-form interviews with pioneering global mobility leaders. I'm Paul, CEO at PerchPeek, at the one-stop shop for all things global mobility, and I'm delighted to have David McAlister join me today. He's achieved the trifecta of having worked in-house at one of the big four, being a global mobility leader himself, and also been on an assignment himself. So sort of experienced life as an expat, working at one of the big four, and life as an in-house mobility leader. So couldn't be more thrilled to have you on today, David. Introduce yourself and tell us how you fell into the wonderful world of mobility.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And yeah, great to be here. I'm really pleased to be having this chat with you today. And I think reflecting on your intro about me, I refer to myself as a GM lifer.
Nice.
I've done nothing but, and actually this is my 18th year in the industry. I know I obviously look far too young to have achieved.
Congrats.
But yeah, so it's a long time. And what, I think reflecting on how I came into global mobility, I don't meet many people that kind of say they grew up wanting to be a global mobility professional.
That's very true.
So I think like most people, I kind of fell into it, taking a job in kind of a big management consulting company, and kind of found myself within their global mobility team, literally doing the assignment management.
Wow.
So I really did start on talking to the assignees. I then
What sort of aspects were you helping the assignees with? Was it just case management?
Things and the physical relocation.
Okay.
The company I was working for just into the UK was moving thousands of people.
Yeah.
So it was big. I had about 700 assignees under management, just myself on my little subsection of the team.
Nice.
So yeah, it was everything from, talking to them about where they'll live, and helping them get flights, and then talking to them about what life's like in the UK as well. So really quite hands-on.
Yeah. I'd actually love to dig in there before we sort of go on to moving in-house and working as your own sort of travels. What was it like? I mean, that is properly starting in the weeds, helping individuals relocating. 700 assignees at one go sounds terrifying. Your hair's looking incredible considering. Like, what were some of your key takeaways from being in the trenches, helping so many people relocate so early in your career?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'd done jobs whilst I was at university in customer services, so answering the phone, dealing with complaints mainly. So I think that taught me to just how to deal with people who may have, quite specific concerns, and just putting them at ease about what's happening. So I think the kind of empathy aspect to mobility was there early in my career.
Yeah.
I think I did move away from that, which we'll touch on a bit later. But yeah, I think, these are people moving, and often for this company, they were software engineers. So, well-educated, but still fairly early in their careers, moving away from families, on their own to the UK, which, whilst it might have been a well-trodden path for some of their colleagues and friends, it's still a big deal.
Yeah, and I think that empathy piece is like so crucial in our industry because it's stressful relocating, right? And I'd love that too. Really interesting that even before your GM journey, you mentioned you worked in customer support. I think something that I'm always curious about, I think about PerchPeek, and I know others in the industry, is like, you've worked in customer support, you've worked in assignment management. What would you describe as the main differences between a more textbook customer support role and what you were doing in the assignment management space and helping individuals there?
Yeah.
Are they the same?
I think, certainly the roles I had in the kind of customer support, it was normally problem solving.
Yeah.
But it would be a single problem that you could resolve there and then.
Yes.
Relocating someone and helping them through that process is a much more personal affair for them. I've got all sorts of funny stories, but I ended up embedding a note in the assignee briefings to tell them to buy a winter jacket, because if they were relocating to the UK at certain times of year from parts of India, that would often be feedback we got about how cold it was.
Yeah.
And it's just simple things like that, I think.
Yeah, I think a couple of nuggets in there for me. One is the sort of difference between it being as like a single problem to solve then and there, and that almost like relationship being built up over time, which is tricky, I think. And then two is just like there's random things when you're doing private management, right? And you're sort of like, as much as you try and productize it, and that definitely resonates with us people feeling cold. I think we had one chap we were helping to relocate from Mauritius to Canada, the depths of Canada in the winter. I was just in deep concerns about it. And it's like little things that you do. Obviously, in our industry, we'll come onto it. It's easy to think about like household goods and DSP and stuff, but often it's little things that people actually make a big difference.
So I agree.
So that was in the weeds, really sort of learning about the assignee journey, the person relocating, etc. Let's fast forward. You've done roles now across other vendors. You've done roles in-house. You've been an expat yourself. I'd love to learn, particularly as you started changing from a career perspective into in-house roles. What other things did you start to learn outside of the scope of assignment management?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So my first job was in a very big company.
Yeah,
had 10,000 expats moving around. We had technology. Everything was well defined. People knew what they were doing. We were leveraging the tech to do all sorts of things. And this is back in 2006, 2007.
Wow.
I then moved to not a small program, but certainly smaller, of about 400 expats. And whilst the program was well run, policies and processes well defined, we didn't have any of that infrastructure.
Yeah.
So, and it, and the approach was different. It was a completely different organization, often sending single engineers to projects in remote places.
Yeah.
With their families sometimes. And it was just a completely different approach to the kind of high volume, pace that was there, when it's now a bit more measured and considering family moves. So it taught me very quickly that no programs are the same.
Yeah.
That may sound obvious, but there can be huge differences, even from the company culture perspective, on why people are moving.
Yeah.
And that can impact everything from how you talk to the employees, which vendors you use. Let's
actually, and because I think and it probably wouldn't be very good for our careers if there was just one easy way to do it.
Solution.
So, exactly. But what you mentioned some different use cases for why people were relocating there and how that can adjust policies and vendors. How did you, when you were thinking about that, or working with the team to think about what is right for that program, how were you doing that in a structured way? Were you using assignee interviews? Were you speaking to other sort of similar programs? Like, how do you try and build up that policy that is right for your population and your use cases?
I think, interestingly, because that was early in my career, I actually got more involved in kind of the policy design and strategy when I was on the vendor side.
Interesting.
Working with lots of different organizations. And I think over time, you kind of are able to drill into these things a bit easier and ask sometimes the right questions. And even in my role today, it's really about, why are these people moving?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of it? Is it a skills gap that we have in a certain location? Is it that there's a growth opportunity there? Does the employee, have they put their hand up and they want to go? Or are we trying to partner with a new organization? Because each of those reasons can, lend itself to handle it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that's then subjective within the organization itself. So I kind of like the multi-layers to it, but I always start with the purpose.
Yeah.
And that normally comes from the business view. Why are we doing this? Or where are the opportunities that we may need to explore?
Yeah. What an insight to link it back to that business purpose for the move, because it can be confusing, right? Sometimes it can make complete business sense to spend $1 million on someone's assignment. Sometimes it can make complete sense to spend $2,000 on just sponsoring their visa and giving nothing else. And
it's interesting you come back to the money, the cost, because I've had conversations, multiple times in my career where organizations may have spent that money to do the right thing for the employee, where there might not have been the business benefit. And I'm coming from a kind of financial background. Well, is that the right thing? But then combining that with the empathy and my personal experience of an assignment, it's, well, there is a person and often a family attached behind these moves.
For sure. And I'm looking forward to digging into your own personal experience and that in a bit. One point I did want to go back to, though, was you mentioned transitioning from an organization where there was good technology, and things were pretty automated and pretty slick, to going to an organization where there isn't necessarily that technology in place. You're running off spreadsheets, etc. I think that's going to resonate a lot with a lot of people. Certainly, we hear a lot of people, people, etc. What would having experienced your sort of first place where things were quite automated, and then moving somewhere to where maybe you didn't have that? What were some of the pain points that you sort of saw of things being a little bit less automated and having slightly less slick tech, shall we say?
Yeah, I think there was a personal adjustment because
talk personally.
When it was a bit more technology enabled, I would come in, open up the software application, and it would literally tell me my actions for the next 15, 30 and 60 days.
I love that.
These are expiring, or someone's assignment ending, or a tax accrual that needs adjusting. So I would be running off this workflow, which was great. And then obviously when that disappears and you've essentially not got any less work, you're having to kind of organize yourself. But I think that was a learning point more than that. I guess it's just about time it takes to keep a spreadsheet updated or find information when you need it. Or just work on the administration of tasks that technology could do. And as I've worked with different organizations on the vendor side as well, it just becomes I hate to use the kind of value add phrase, but it's like that doesn't really add value if you're copying data from one spreadsheet to another, or getting one file from your vendor that you have to add other things to send it to another. But they're all necessary parts of the cog that keep the machine's ability going. And I think what I see in the market now is the kind of what I call the implementation barriers to technology, where it would be a 2-year project and cost astronomical amounts of money, take up lots of resource. That they're coming down massively. And also the cost to procure the technology is lower, and there's a kind of lower entry point for some of the smaller programs. So I personally think the opportunities are there, and there's kind of a bit of a call to action for mobility leaders of all program sizes to just understand what is there and how that can help.
I love that in a few ways. One is the landscape has changed quite a lot, and there are lower cost, lower time options to get going, and it's not a 2-year necessarily £1 million plus investment to get going with this, which is understandably a huge blocker for lots of organizations. Secondly, your point around it, you having to build your own system personally to manage workflows, and some of the time burden that creates for people is it's a bit of a hidden cost, because you don't necessarily see it in terms of like an actual cost beyond obviously the salary. But when you use better tech, you realize I'm now spending a high percentage of my day doing manual tasks that could just be automated, and somewhere along the line that means there's that you could be doing other sort of slightly higher value add activities elsewhere, and you're not hired to be a workflow process creation genius at the end of the day.
Excel warrior.
Excel warrior, exactly. Excel warrior. I think there's a few of those listening to the podcast right now. We salute you all because it's not easy. And then tell me then, so you had this fascinating experience across in-house, across working on the vendor side as well. You're now in seat as an in-house GM leader. Tell me how you think your experience working on the vendor side has benefited you now as you're sort of looking to improve and enhance your in-house program.
It's a really good question because I did a handover. So I'm in an interim role, and I did a handover with the previous GM leader who were coming back, and she's highly organized. I like to think I am, and it was a stark reminder of the breadth and depth of what global mobility teams house teams have to cover. One minute you can be dealing with a nuanced case where might be some immigration challenges. The next minute you're talking about tax changes, or at the same time navigating labor laws and trying to manage costs, managing multiple vendors. It's just and a lot of people in the organization come to you for all sorts of questions. Funky recruitment ideas about, can we hire someone in this place, send them here and do all these things. And it's just, so the just the sheer breadth of what you have to cover, just a stark reminder to me. I think it's, the kind of vendor side piece for me is kind of dual. There's kind of two aspects to it. One is, as a vendor, you're highly kind of rewarded for internal metrics.
Yes.
Which is all about efficiency and adaptability and kind of serving clients in the best way. And kind of on the other side of that, when you're in-house, it's often vendors are dealing with part of the problem. Not everything you have to deal with. So while it might be one of your vendors' full-time job to do this, it might be 5% of your role, and therefore you're not giving it as much thought, and it may not be as significant in your day-to-day job. It's a cog in the wheel, but it just needs to be working. So just quite an interesting perspective on when those two things meet. You can see how there can be some interesting conversations. Or
no, definitely. I can imagine that sets you up very well to empathize with vendors who are probably very passionate about their sort of piece of the pie, and probably view it as the entire world, and are like, hey, why don't you care more about this piece of it? And you're there going, well, this piece is going great, I'm loving it, but I've got the rest of it to deal with. So to some extent, it's like, if things are going great, it's going great. So
and I certainly don't want to dampen that enthusiasm. Because I think they play a massive part in moving the industry forward. Innovation, absolutely critical.
And I think that's something that's come through our conversations as well, is that appreciation that to some extent the specialization of vendors is great, because they're spending all day on things, so they are going on similar things, so they are going to have more time, resource to maybe move things forwards in a way that is more challenging for in-house folk to do. And at the same time, so it's a balance, and it sounds like you exude that well. That leads nicely onto the other thing that I know sort of feeds your ethos around global mobility and passion for the space is you've lived and relocated around the world as an expat. Tell us about where you've lived, what were your experiences, and how that feeds into being a global mobility lifer now, and how you see the industry.
So I think probably sits in three categories. I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of business travel, and the negative view I have of that is I've seen a lot of airports, hotels, meeting rooms, but I have therefore been to lots of cities around the world, Europe, the US, and then parts of Asia as well. So pretty well traveled. But the kind of positive piece on that is just meeting people from different cultures in a business environment. Often on business travel, whether that was internal within my in-house roles or as a client, you would then be kind of socializing with your clients as well. So you got to experience part of the culture during those trips as well. So that's great. And, I think there's lots of things about business travel that are really positive. Lots of things that perhaps aren't so in terms of fatigue and things like that. But I definitely, the positives outweigh the negatives.
For sure. And I think that's something that quite a few leaders in the global mobility space, I feel, have been struggling sometimes in a post-COVID environment to get budget, to go travel, to go to either conferences or to go meet their team if they have a distributed team. But I definitely agree, whilst you don't want to, I don't think anyone misses the days of getting on a plane to go for the first introduction and then meet and then leave and maybe nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
When the timing is right for your QBR with a vendor or your ABR, your annual business review, or for a conference, that point you mentioned around breaking bread and really experiencing culture and socializing is just as important as the connection, right? And it really helps.
Definitely.
I guess make real what we do in global mobility, where you're oh wow, things are different around the world, and it is kind of cool from that perspective. So that's the business travel.
Yeah, the second kind of bucket for me, I was on a commuter assignment.
Oh, nice.
So I was commuting to Germany, and I would get up on a Monday, get a very early flight out of Heathrow, and then fly back on a Thursday afternoon. And I did that 3 weeks out of 4 for about 9 months, I think. So that was interesting because it wasn't relocating and immersing myself in this culture. I was spending significant time there. So, aside from the early morning commutes, it did mean I could focus a lot on the business side that I was working on at that time.
We've got to dive into commuter assignments. Putting aside your slip back into in-house GM leader hat, are commuter assignments worth it? In that instance, why were you on a commuter assignment? Should you really have just gone on a short-term assignment there for 9 months? Tell us your view, having experienced both sides.
I think it was interesting because if I reflect on the personal side, that worked for me. Because it meant I had time here back in the UK where I live, and I was also able to gain that international experience and work on projects and things that may not have had the opportunity to. I think the business rationale for it at the time was we didn't necessarily know how long it would be.
Interesting.
And therefore, setting up some sort of formal secondment or recognising it on a different policy maybe might not have been the right approach. So I think there was a business need and it worked for me personally.
So I think sometimes, and I think sometimes some people are a bit nervous about setting up commuter assignments or commuter arrangements early on, and I think it is because the first point you made about it being good for you personally is super valid, right? There's no point in you're just going to churn or not take it. It's much better to set it up. How was it logistically getting it set up? Was it something that was fairly easy, both for your personal experience, but also to when you've sort of set up commuter arrangements in your in-house roles?
Yeah, I think, the particular example when I was the commuter was fairly easy. It was a fairly easy travel route. I already knew some of the team I was visiting because we'd worked together. Wasn't the most glamorous of locations in Germany. Not going to name now.
No shade.
But, certainly nicer parts I could travel to. And then for me, having the Friday back working from home and then a week where I would be back in the UK was helpful to stay connected as well. I just think in terms of setting them up, there's always considerations around the tax and immigration, in particular nowadays, which may not have been such an issue across Europe before. But I think I'll just go back to the point I've already said. If there's if the business need is there and it works for the individual, I firmly believe it's always global mobility's role to not put the blockers up, but to actually maybe suggest alternatives that may work easier, but also then find a way to make these things happen.
Yes.
And just highlight the perhaps costs or compliance requirements in the right way to the business.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I like most about our conversations is you have that can-do attitude that is like, okay, let's make it happen. If there is a good business need, let's make it happen. Because often there is a way to make things. Sometimes you obviously have to say no, but if you sort of highlight, okay, here's another option, etc., can make it work. So that's your commuter time, 9 months going back and forth to Germany. Let's talk the final piece of the puzzle, the whole relocation.
Well, I was I went on a long-term assignment which lasted nearly 3 years. To Dubai, so a real hardship location for me.
Sounds very tough.
Yes, I didn't take the winter coat.
Exactly.
Earlier. But yeah, that was it was really interesting actually, because I've been working on an internal project with the team out there, and then again there was kind of a business opportunity that came up, and I very much put my hat in the rings, and made sure my name was attached to it.
Well done.
That was supported by the business, which I was really pleased about. It's something I'd wanted to do right from the early days of my career. Me working in this field. I'd had a couple of, I'd say, failed opportunities before. One to Buenos Aires, which I was being asked to go on a local package, and I worked. Given at the time, I would hardly have been able to afford a flight home. And the other was actually to Hong Kong, but then the company decided they needed somebody local to do the role. And so I'd had those kind of opportunities there in some quite interesting locations. And then this, the Dubai opportunity was, it was a destination of choice for me, for sure. And then the business opportunity, but behind it was also quite interesting. So,
but before we dig in there, something you said there, I think I didn't know that you'd had this sort of failed potential move to Buenos Aires where you didn't accept it because of the ultimately it sounds like the assignment type. It sounds like they wanted you to go on a local package, go on a local contract. Essentially,
well, given I knew what the long-term assignment policy was of the company, it was but
then it sounds like potentially the reverse was true in Dubai, where like your permanent transfers to Dubai, it's not necessarily as detrimental local packages. I don't know at the time what it was like, but you were on the long-term assignment policy there, when actually maybe you would have been keen, even as it had been, just obviously with the tax situation in Dubai versus BA. How did that manifest itself in the sense of why was one opportunity treated as a local? Why was one LTA? How can you help GM leaders think about like what type of assignment is best to attract talent?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting because I think literally right now in our industry, there's a, seismic shift in policies. Gone are the days of just refining your long-term assignment policy. There is a massive shift towards more permanent transfers. And learning more about those in terms of permanent transfers with the right to return, which isn't that a long-term assignment, but
without some of the costs associated with it. Like, wait, that bit sounds good, but the tax part, let's leave that out.
So things are evolving, but I do think and I don't want to bring COVID into this, but post-COVID, the remote work topic and just the requirements of employees, I do think the policy types are shifting. So it's actually a really interesting question, because I don't think it's as simple as is it short-term, long-term, or a permanent transfer anymore, or even is it just an employee-initiated move? Because I think even that's a kind of grey area from a policy perspective, because is it an employee-initiated move that has a big business upside? And therefore, should we support it as a business move?
Exactly.
I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier. What's the purpose? So what's the purpose? What's the business rationale? And certainly at the moment, is there a policy gap that can be supported in a different way? And I think it's about flexibility and just helping the policies be a bit more agile in supporting the move types.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I'd add into that is trying to track the data around this. I'm always shocked that
100%.
a lot of programs aren't tracking sometimes like assignments that are being offered and not accepted.
Yeah,
and vice versa. Almost like, would they? Because it sounds like in your instance, you were open to relocating. You just needed the terms to be right. So in some ways, there's like this happy medium, and it depending on where it was and what the package was, you were keen to move. And somewhere in that world is like a great worker who's going to add a lot of value to the organization somewhere in the world for the right terms. And it's just trying to structure it in a way that is cost effective and serves the purpose to the business of adding the value. I love that grey area between employee driven moves, and it's like we often call it like the harmonized relocations, where it's like the person's quite interested in relocating. There is actually a job there, and it works for the business. And it's
I love that phrase. I'm going to use that one now.
yeah. You could steal it. You could steal it. And you started to briefly touch on it there. You have all of this experience of, travel, commuting, LTAs, or just full blown reload. What did you learn from those different environments that, when you're crafting policy or ultimately trying to help your programs now, you have from that expat perspective?
Yeah. I think if to try and summarize that in a sentence, the experiences, they profoundly and positively impacted me professionally and personally.
Yeah.
The impact has been huge. Everything from, just working in new cultures, some of the personal connections I've made either during those business trips or the short-term areas or actually when I was living in another country, I have many friends that I'm very close to now, even though I've now relocated back.
Yeah.
So, so it's huge. It's literally, a massive impact on my life. And, I'm sure there were negatives at the time of the pain of moving and other challenges like that. But the positives by far outweigh the negatives for me.
Yeah. And let's just hit that big sort of stop button in terms of if you get the chance to live abroad. I think we both say just go take it, because it's what an opportunity, right? And I think it's like we're fortunate to work in an industry where we get to support people doing that and often seeing like what an amazing life experience it is. And it's so gratifying being able to facilitate people in making that easier and sort of helping them to make that relocation happen. And and that's like when you sort of peel back, policy and assignment type and all of this stuff that sort of goes into making it happen. Actually, just being able to facilitate people, in that life step is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, and I kind of connect with that purpose.
Yeah,
and that's what drives me. And I think back to your question on what did I learn or what did I take out? If I frame that from a kind of global mobility perspective, it's the kind of human-centric view, bringing back that empathy into the relocations, because they are people moving. I remember having a task list that was in excess of 100 things I had to do before I left.
Wow.
Everything from packing up my house to what am I just gonna, what deserves to go to the tip? What can we, what needs to be sold? What are we just gonna store somewhere? Arranging to say goodbye to people. A bit of a celebration with friends before we went. But even things like making sure I went and saw my elderly relatives just in case. Now, luckily, all that was okay when I came back. It's things like that unless you've done it, you may, you can't really put yourself in that situation. A funny story about one of my relocations, I had said goodbye to my family and friends, actually moved out of my house, and then unfortunately my visa was delayed.
Nice.
So I then found myself walking down the high street where I live, looking at me, I haven't moved, and it's like, not yet. But obviously, that was just
I love that.
A funny side to it. I could see the funny side myself.
Exactly. And you can resonate as a professional in the industry, and everyone could feel that pain of like, delayed move. Classic.
Exactly. Classic. But I think they're some of the things when, if you're advising the business or if you're a vendor and things are delayed, there's often a bigger impact than just somebody not getting on a plane.
100%. Yeah. All of these sort of knock-on effects and that linking of the personal and professional is crazy. And I know you're a very busy person, and so on a tight schedule, but we have this great tradition on the podcast of the previous guest leaving a question for the next guest. And for you, I think one, based on your LinkedIn content will be right in your sweet spot is, can you tell us about what you think the future of work looks like from a mobility perspective, and how or where the opportunities are for mobility as we look towards the future?
Oh, well, I love this question.
Yeah. So I thought you'd like it. I was like, that's a well done question.
Yeah, it's something I'm really interested in and finding myself, reading more and more about, talking to people about. So, well, I think if I think about kind of short term, we're already in the midst of, more sustainability focus. I think that's going to continue, eco-friendly assignments. Compliance landscapes are changing. I think there's a paradox in immigration where, to win votes, politicians are promising to restrict migration, but at the same time, we need to entice highly skilled migrants. And I don't think it's just the UK, by the way.
That's around the world.
We've obviously got the year of the election where I think 49% of the globe is going to vote this year.
Yeah.
And with that also comes tax promises and legislation changes.
Yeah.
And interestingly, some countries are now, they don't target the voters for increased taxes. They're targeting expats. So the Netherlands is an example.
Yeah, very true.
And then for me, the increased digitalization, and we touched on remote work earlier, but I think people's expectations have changed. And the kind of more flexible policies or personalized policies, I think will happen in that's the kind of short-term view. I think medium term, technology.
Yeah.
Got to mention AI.
Yeah.
I think it will be around in the short term, but I think it will start to really have an impact. But other areas like blockchain, for example, just lend themselves to a visa process. Highly secure, highly automated. And if things like that kick in and governments adopt them, then you could find visa processes can almost be instant.
Yeah.
If that's kind of in the next 5 to 15 years, maybe. But, and then, I think if you think about emerging markets, I think some of their infrastructure and kind of, urbanization will come into fruition, and you might find some of the general swim lanes of mobility changing, where there's new hubs for certain activities in some of the emerging markets. And then, I think long term, the political and economic shifts aren't going to go away. But one area and we've touched on this in another conversation we've had, that just transportation. So air travel, even things like hyperloops, which when I lived in Dubai, they talked about all the time. If you can travel very long distances extremely quickly, those commuter assignments or you may be able to commute much longer distances, and therefore, do you need to relocate, or do you locate where you want to live, and then work just becomes an easier travel. So I think there's some kind of big things there. One thing I just want to say is I think global mobility we hold the key to actually the future of work. Like I genuinely believe this. If you have to look in organizations today, look at the trends on the flexibility in work and people's choice of where and how and when they work, the, tech and skills evolution that's happening, and just the way companies target global talent now, and decentralized workforces. Which are the teams in if you had to pick one team in an organization that could encompass a lot of that skills and experience, I think I think, global in-house professionals, vendors, I think we have that collective wisdom to really not only help our organizations become future ready, but actually help define it.
Yeah.
That's something, as I've said, I'm quite passionate about in helping the wider community kind of realize this and help us define the future.
Well, what a great note to end on, because I think you hear all sorts in the community at the moment. Some people, I think, rightfully nervous because that traditional long-term assignment is definitely declining. And so, in some ways, the sort of steady state of, you've got 500 expats and, the certain proportions going to keep going is declining. There's no doubts about that. But as you say, the realm of opportunities, both in terms of how people want to work in the future and how far up the agenda immigration and taxes of this mobile sort of workforce around the world, those two things alone just mean that there's constant change. There's constant ability for mobility to sort of be proactive in shaping the agenda internally and not just reactive to, hey, David wants to move to Dubai, make that happen. And that is an exciting and I love the ambitions.
I've got a view that, if you really, really raise the profile of the global mobility function, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that it actually becomes the function that leads the firm.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, that will definitely be a topic, because it definitely is not beyond the realms of possibility.
Yeah. We should set the strategy, not react and adapt to it, because it would help companies take advantage of global.
And definitely go from something that most people don't know about to being well, actually, this is a core pillar of how our workforce wants to work these days. And people want to move around, people want to do different things, people want to spend some time here, some time there, and definitely, if you were to think global mobility initially was a bolt-on to typically the growth of multinationals, and you had a US entity or UK entity company starting entities around the world, and it was sending people out. But that was the starting point, right? It was expanding from the initial country and sort of bolting on. It wasn't necessarily our entire workforce or a large part of our workforce is interested in moving around, and we're already. So if you just sort of restart org designs from now, you can definitely imagine it being wow, this mobility piece fundamental to how we operate. I think that's an exciting future to charge towards. We've got on for far too long, my friend, so let's put a pin in it now. Thank you for being such a wonderful guest.
It's been great.
It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you to everyone for listening, as always. If you have people that you'd like to see on the pod, just let us know. But until then, David, good job by you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Cheers. Bye.